Hey YouTube, Vermont Prepper here. Today I'm continuing my Prepper Philosophy series by going through my top 5 scenarios that I prep for. If you watched my first part of the series, it was why I became a prepper. I urge you to go back and check that out if you haven't seen that. And I think regarding the top 5 SHTF scenarios, there's going to be differing opinions. So please comment on whether you think I'm right or wrong. Personally, I don't think there is a right or wrong answer. But I think that if you're prepping for something, you're probably ahead of 85 to 90% of the people in the United States, since we've become so comfortable with our technology and creature comforts that exist today. I'm going to be going from number 1, my top thing that I prep for, to number 5. And instead of going backwards 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to create kind of suspense, I believe in giving the most important thing up front. So especially if you have only a few minutes to listen to the video, I'd rather you get my most important thing than my least important thing. So here it goes. First one is pandemic or bioterror. I think this is the most likely SHTF scenario, and to me, it's also probably the scariest. And if you look at today, the Ebola epidemic going on in the Congo, take a look at how that spreads, Ebola. If you know anything about it, it has a very short incubation period, and that helps actually prevent it from spreading. Symptoms show up really quick, and it kills off people within days if it's untreated. If it mutated, however, to lengthen the incubation period, we could have a real problem. People could conceivably travel without symptoms. But I don't want to just talk about Ebola only, because that's not our only problem. Bill Gates recently said that a mosquito-borne virus actually poses a greater threat to mankind than global war. And think about that. You see bunkers created by billionaires all over the place. People like Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal, he becomes a New Zealand citizen and buys land over there to create a compound. Pretty dramatic. I guess he feels that New Zealand is pretty remote and that you could survive something out there. The government's pretty stable, and I guess he feels that he could ride it out over there. Him, and not only just him, but others as well. And it kind of leads me to believe, I'm not really conspiratorial, but they have a lot of contacts around the world, and I always wonder what they know that we don't know. Now, do I believe there would be sort of a zombie apocalypse? Kind of, I don't know, maybe kind of morbid to say, but kind of fun to think about. But I don't really believe that it's going to be in the sense like Walking Dead, where they're coming back from the dead after they're done, and you can't kill them unless you shoot them in the head. But I think there could be a pandemic that causes people to go crazy and attack each other due to some kind of pathogen in their brain. You might even think about, like, if you think about like how to defend against something like that. If these people are infected to a certain extent where their brain is making them go crazy to the extent where they're trying to cannibalize others, they might not be taken down with a standard 5.56. You might need to use like a 7.62 or something even bigger, like a 4.58 SOCOM, which was developed out of the Black Hawk Down Mogadishu issue. And for those of you who haven't seen Black Hawk Down, the 458 SOCOM was born out of the real life scenario in Mogadishu, Somalia. the military found that a lot of the Somalis that were attacking them were high on the drug called khat, Khat, which is derived from a plant, and it's a stimulant, and it basically, I guess, I don't know how it works chemically, but 5.56 rounds didn't take them down. It took like 2 or 3 rounds to really kill these guys. So they just kept coming. So the 458 SOCOM round was born, and that was, they go up to 500 grains versus a 5.56, which is 62 grains, but they're really expensive, and they can be held in a regular AR mag, but at the same time you can't hold as many. So what do you do? Anyways, I just wanted to kind of digress from that, is that because I believe that you really don't know how you're going to be able to defend against the pandemic. It's not simple as being able to get resources or get some food or water or whatever. You may have to defend yourself against people that have the disease, that maybe they're desperate to look for help, and desperate people do desperate things, or they just can't control themselves. So you have to think about how you're going to defend yourself. So something that at least I think about. To get back to pandemic, I believe it's very, very realistic, and we're overdue for it. The last main pandemic that killed millions and millions of people was in 1918, and that was the Spanish flu. And we're overdue for it. Now, one of the good things, I guess, about the media, you could say a lot about the media today, things going on in the media, but one of the good things about controlling pandemic is that you basically have news real time, so that when something happens in the Congo or some other remote place like Indonesia or China where there's bird flu in some remote village, we know about it right away, so we can react to it a lot quicker. So in some ways, that's kind of self-regulating, which might be a reason why we were able to control it for so long, but we're overdue. There's going to be something that that happens eventually, and maybe it's something like bioterror, which we haven't talked about yet. And think about that, is really, it would take nothing more than a group of terrorists to infect themselves with a mutated disease and start traveling around and spreading it in airports. And I always think about the movie 12 Monkeys when I think about bioterror, where the disease that killed everybody was spread around in an airport initially. And if you haven't seen that movie, by the way, I'm sure most of you guys have, starring Bruce Willis. Check it out. And by the way, the sci-fi TV series is pretty good as well. All right, number 2, grid down or other type of scenario. I know the rhetoric has died down on North Korea, but frankly, I really do not trust them. I think that the North Koreans are probably co-developing a super EMP with the Chinese, or even possibly the Iranians. Former CIA Director James Woolsey came out with a report on what would happen if an EMP occurred, and it was pretty devastating, actually. Basically, he said that 90% of Americans could be dead in a year if a massive EMP hit. And it's not from radioactive fallout, because you don't get fallout with an EMP. It's basically because people would be without electricities and possibly even without cars or anything like that. I'm not sure I agree with the 90%, but the number of deaths will definitely be significant. And the reason why is, you think about all the already unhealthy people who have a hard time with electricity. Now let's compound that with the ones who need medicine, such as insulin, which needs to be kept cool. So those with diabetes, they're going to have a hard time. And eventually, in a prolonged grid down scenario, the medicine will be gone. So it really won't matter if they can keep it cool, because it's not going to be around. And the reason I feel that North Korea might have such a capability is that it currently has 2 satellites that fly over the U.S. numerous times on a daily basis. And the flight path is in such a way that they really make it hard to defend against it. They fly over the Mexican border through Texas, where our missile defense is not as solid as it could be. And I personally believe that only one out of the two might have such a capability, even like for a smaller EMP. The older satellite, known as KMS-3, that's pretty small, but the newer one, the KMS-4, that's about 440 pounds, and it would still be pushing the limit on the need to miniaturize and deliver an EMP, but with some Chinese technological advances, the possibility does exist, at least in my view. And by the way, you can track these satellites via an app known as Satellite Tracker. You can see exactly where it is on the world map, what country it's over. And I use this app not only to track satellites, but to track NOAA satellites, the weather satellites, since I have a special antenna to record high-resolution images of the weather onto my computer. So I could get like cloud cover and, major storms. I could see a hurricane, whatever. But it's a really, really cool app to track these things. All right, the other thing regarding grid down is we also need to think about a plain old solar flare. And I know most of you have heard that follow EMPs, the one in the 1800s known as the Carrington effect, the Carrington effect, that basically caused telegraphs to catch fire. And if one like that were to hit today, it would send us back to the 1800s because of our dependence on technology like we just discussed. Now, if you take a look on the flip side, cyber attack, I think I would recommend everybody reading Ted Koppel's book called Lights Out. That should be mandatory prepper reading. I would say that you're not really a prepper until you have read that book. It is absolutely unbelievable. He has given his notoriety as a famous newsman he has access to top officials. He can get access to anybody. And he did. And he interviewed them about the grid and its capabilities, ability to defend itself against cyber attack. And he comes across being quite certain that Russians and Chinese are already in our grid and basically can flip a switch to shut us down. Now that said, on the flip side, I bet we're probably in their grid and can do the same. So it kind of creates its own checks and balance. But our electrical grid is very unprepared and outdated. It's controlled, by smaller local companies, not like the PSE&G of the past, where it's one electric company because it was a monopoly and they broke things up like that. So it's uncontrolled. The smaller companies don't talk to the larger companies, and they don't have updated software sometimes. Here in Vermont, there was one of the workers, it was a big scare on the news that there was a cyber attack in Burlington Telecom, but it happened to be only a laptop of a personal laptop of a particular employee. And again, it's one of the news. The news is sensational here, just like everywhere. They created this whole thing where it was this huge cyber attack where it was just one laptop. But the ability does exist. They can flip the switch, basically. If you read this book, you will definitely come away with that understanding that it is very, very fragile, the grid. All right. Number 3, social unrest. All you have to do is turn on the news again, the dramatic news, to get yourself sick of the destruction happening in this country by terror groups such as Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and other groups that are funded by wealthy anarchists to create havoc. We can see real-life examples like UC Berkeley fires and destruction, clashes and destruction all over the country from Antifa, destruction of property. It's almost like a civil war without the actual war going on in the country. And no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, one thing we can all agree on is that the country really is divided, and this unrest does have the possibility to escalate into a more widespread type of unrest, particularly in the urban areas where, big concentration of population. I think in rural areas, people are more tight-knit, but in urban areas, it's dog eat dog, right? So they're gonna create more havoc fast. So if you live in an urban area, just be aware that you probably already are, but just be aware that this thing can happen and have a plan to get out. Don't come to Vermont, though. Just kidding. Anyway, terrorism, number 4. I read another book by William Forstchen, and it was called Day of Wrath. And in this book, it was a wide-scale attack on schools across the country by terrorists, where terrorists would attack schools with their AR-15s or whatever kind of weapons they had, semi-autos or autos. Really doesn't matter. But I kind of tend to think that it's less likely that terrorists could mount such a large-scale attack like that, because I have really faith in the FBI to be able to thwart this kind of attack, especially the widespread one. And people might say, okay, well, what about 9/11? And I would say, yes, that caused massive casualty, but it really was not a widespread attack. It was planned and targeted for maximum damage. By widespread, I mean coordinated attacks across the country. And even though I'm not minimizing 9/11 by any shape or form, it was devastating. And if you think about it, it basically paralyzed our country and caused us to spend billions of dollars to go to war. And these wars continue today. So there's an economic factor in addition to the human casualties. I remember Wall Street basically crashed, went down very, very significant, and it was a lasting effect because we really had to spend a lot of money to really pull ourselves out of it, and could have been really a precursor, 9/11, to a lot of the issues we had in the stock market back in 2006, 2007, where it was sort of like a hangover from that because we had to spend so much money and we didn't have controls in place for doing so, and caused banks like Lehman to fail, which created a chain reaction. So a lot of things you have to think about. And also, just as everybody has seen, terrorists really don't need guns anymore. They've graduated to using cars and knives. If you look at London and other parts of Europe, and even here in the US, these terrorists are running down people and they're using knives to stab them. I also think about, and I hate to say it, but look at the fires in California going on. The terrorists could go around starting fires. Look at how much economic issues that created over in California. People are losing their houses. There's businesses that are going under because people aren't around to buy anything from them. So that could also create an economic havoc by terrorists starting fires in places that don't have great management of their forest. I think about Vermont here, and there's plenty of things like down trees and and other things from snow or ice storms. And if we don't really have a dry season like that to a large extent, but if there was, I could see us having a problem here. And there's some burn rules here. Certain times of the year you can't do burns for your trash, but it could be a problem here as well. But in California or some places like Colorado, it could be a real problem if terrorists starting fires there. All right, last one, nuclear war. And I rank this as number 5. There's a big question mark now as to the North Korean capabilities and regarding nuclearization and their ability to use it in a conventional sense, not an EMP sense where you don't have fallout. I'm talking about where they launch and it explodes near ground. In EMP, it's going to explode at some altitude to create the EMP effect, and there's no fallout associated with that. Some believe that North Korea has not yet miniaturized their nukes enough to deliver on an ICBM or some other intermediate missile. But think about this. I took a course on nuclear terrorism in Stanford, online course actually. And one of the things we talked about was the ability to deliver a small nuke via freight in international waters. So you're not going to have the Coast Guard looking around and being able to stop a nuclear bomb in a port. You have small nuclear bomb launched from a freight or from a small sub that I believe the Koreans are working on as well. And it doesn't need to have a big impact. It could be something as little as a dirty bomb that affects only a big city block. What it's going to do is it's going to create panic, and that's what terror is all about, creating panic as well as casualties. So what the terrorists probably don't understand is we don't back down to that. So if they did that, it would be all out war. It'd be World War III. So I believe that it's probably the least likely scenario, but something yet to keep in mind. I actually do keep some potassium iodide pills to protect my thyroid if there was fallout. But let's not only talk about North Korea. Let's talk about China or Russia. What if something escalates with them? All bets are off there, right? With China and Russia, there's really limited capability to defend against the sheer amount of ICBMs that'll be coming towards us. And I don't know if you saw Putin, he had some kind of speech where he kind of unveiled this hypersonic missile, and he used Florida as a target. It was sort of like a simulation, and he used Florida as a target. This guy's got real balls, man. And we've had only sporadic success on missile-to-missile defense, but against this hypersonic missile, we have no defense against it if it works as he says it does. It's like the equivalent of shooting a speeding bullet with a bullet, but for a hypersonic missile, you can't even shoot at it. The same premise as the SR-71, the Blackbird. It went so fast that they launched missiles against it and they couldn't shoot it down because it just outran it. Same thing with this hypersonic missile. And nuclear war really is by far the hardest event to prepare for. So even if you had a bunker, you could be traveling somewhere or just in general not have enough time to get it if it's off-site, out, not in your main home. Maybe you built it in your bug-out location and you don't have time to get to it. So, in some ways, prepping for a nuclear war really is useless in a lot of ways. And I I do have the iodide pills. I do have water filters that will filter out radioactive waste or radioactive material. But really, there's almost no way you can prep for a nuclear war. But it is something that I do keep in mind. Anyways, that's it, guys. I hope you guys stuck through the end. If you didn't, I hope you come back later on and see it through. And I hope that you guys do comment, because I really am interested in what you have to say. Okay, Vermont Prepper out. And as always, keep on prepping, everyone. Take care. Thanks again.